got a one for you, this one. Do you remember this one? Count it out, Chuck. Yeah.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Scholars get paid to support the institutional narratives, not to tell you the truth. Although a scholar's job should be researching the truth and telling the truth. Unfortunately, it isn't. Their job is to contain the story. We call that controlled opposition. We call that Bart Ehrman. We call that James Tabor. We call that Michael Heiser. And boy, are they getting nice fat paychecks, to not mention Persia.
You're saying you do things differently?
Yeah. Yeah, if I could do it all over again, I'd have killed every single one of you.
Here's a little refresher on who the hell I am.
Hi, and welcome to our Bible study channel.
Energy. 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 You cannot fuck with this. Energy. You cannot fuck with this energy. Doodles in the session. All of those who are listening, don't miss the message judging me. You cannot fuck with this energy. Energy.
These are videos that go pretty in depth. First thing you should probably do is pause and read our 12 rules for reading biblical text. And if you don't like the 12 rules, or you don't understand the 12 rules, well, I don't have time to explain them all. Go back to the book that I wrote and uploaded on this channel, which takes you through the entire arc and how we made these quote-unquote 12 rules as a framework of what we found after 7 years digging meticulously and carefully through the text. So if you're confused, go do that. If I refer back, well, that's probably because we actually post these things in order. So they're all done in series. And if you jump in at the middle of a series without any schema or background knowledge, and you get all pissed off, well, that's also not our problem. This is a group where we go line by line, scroll by scroll through the text. Warning, we are not language sensitive, so if you can't handle some cussing, it's not the place for you. We also do not endorse nor approve of pretty much any mainstream theology. So if you're looking for that, also definitely not the place for you. We do a video about the characters that we use in our Bible study series. And the reason we do this is sort of so that they can kind of get in your head. So we do have a video explaining why we chose the people we chose and how their sort of energy characteristics go along with the biblical characters to modernize it for people so they know what the heck we're reading. Clearly, the Roman Church was not doing their job and looking for the lost sheep of the reunited House of David. So that's what we're doing, okay? We're taking that away from them because they screwed it up. The brilliant rabbis also down there in Babylon are also not looking for the lost sheep of the reunited kingdom of David. So you're not going to hear, let's follow Rome. And you're not going to hear, let's follow the rabbis on this channel. Because, you know, sorry, not sorry, but the Bible wasn't actually written for the corrupt Levitical priesthood post-Babylon and Persia to read it through their little janky books. And it also wasn't written to be read through the eyes of pagan 4th century church fathers. So we're not doing that either. You guys can both have a seat. Oddly enough, the Bible also wasn't written to be read through the eyes of some dumbass scholars with pieces of paper that say they're smarter than everyone, but have never seen a Davidic covenant in their life. Not written for them either. You know who it's written for? It's written for the reunited house of David, who are actually in covenant and are actually the sheep. That's who it's written for. That's why nobody else can understand what the heck's going on. What you are going to hear is what you're supposed to hear, which is, let's follow the king. And let's get started.
So, we are going to war.
Hi, and welcome back. We are doing Paul's Paganism. Wait a minute. Are we doing 4 or is this 5? I don't remember. Let's see. And we're going to get to the bottom of this lion thing. But today we're going to meet Lion 4.0, the Empire Lion or the Persian Lion. And this is the one that doesn't get talked about very much. But, well, pull up a chair. We're going to talk about it. And this will probably make a lot of pieces click into place, we hope. So, going over our agenda, we sort of went through the text structure. We looked at some of the Greek words in the text and how that plays out in our Epiphany narrative. We talked pretty extensively about the legal framing of Acts. We went through the Jesus, Stephen, and James deaths and why those are different. And we talked about how to be really careful about these baby and bathwater arguments. And now we're on to the Lion, version 4.0. Next time we'll get into the scholar's dirty word of syncretism and how all roads lead to Solomon. Then we'll continue our Epiphany narrative. But for today, we are all about lions. So we talked sort of yesterday about shattering lenses, and the Bible's not the problem, okay? The institutional roadblocks, creating blind spots, and making people completely married to their lens. That's the problem. So before you're taking in any information, including me and anybody else out there, ask yourself, what's their lens? What's their bias? What frame are they approaching this? And usually they don't admit what it is. The one thing, at least we tell you exactly what, I got a chip on my shoulder and I got a bias, and I tell you what those are straight up front. Your scholars are not, your preachers are not, and the people stuck in institutional roadblocks may not even know what their lens is. So start there. They might not even know. They're just acting out of what they know, and they haven't audited a next step yet. So keep that in mind. And how does their lens impact the Davidic covenant? Those are the questions to start with. Some institutional roadblocks could be modern things like political Zionism or end times Revelation Inc. marketing. 2 houses versus Judacentricity. The 5 solos and just being completely married to the general Protestant apologetics chain. Well, the church fathers said, or the rabbi said, or the scholars said, be stuck in that box. Stuck in the Roman Catholic or the Constantinian Christology, Greek philosophy, sacrifice priesthood, or the legal priesthood. We're going to talk about that today. The Babylon Persian, well, you might believe or be in the lens of viewing Babylon Persia as the original covenant faith. That's the lens they really don't want to talk about. We're going to go ahead and shatter that today. Because here's a fun fact. All of those are institutionalized. And Jesus was not an institutional guy. Sorry, not sorry. He just wasn't. So here's our cloud. And the number 1 invader is Persia. Now, Solomon built the engine. Babylon gave him the keys. But Persia's the one nobody wants to talk about. And that's the one where if you take out the Persia lens, everything falls. This is why scholars will never mention it. The only time you hear Persia is when they tack it on to Babylon. That's it. We're going to separate Persia from Babylon today and take a nice deep dive into Persia. Gasp. Oh, look, a lion. Lion 1.0 was Caleb. Now, lions aren't people in the Bible, okay? It's never a person. But if you think of it as how this is growing, we saw that Caleb was our very first Edomite to go into the land of Judah and take land, right? But that's not necessarily the problem, okay? Depends on how you see the covenant land. But Caleb coming in, taking land, and then being rewritten as Judah, there's the problem. The fake genealogies and chronicles that were retrofitted to make people like Caleb, he's our first example, and just make everything Judah now. This is a case where the cover-up is worse than what happened, right? It's like something happens and you try to cover it up and you do it really badly. Welcome to the genealogies and chronicles. And you end up telling on yourself. If it wasn't a big deal that someone outside got land, just say, Caleb was a homie and we gave him land. But no, they rewrote the genealogy of Caleb, changing him from Esau to Judah, which means they're hiding something in the genealogy. That means when Esau comes back around as the Herod dynasty, okay, the post-Babylonian priesthood comes in. They needed to tie the genealogies to Judah because they were stealing the identity of the southern kingdom peasantry. That's what they're doing. If they weren't doing it, they wouldn't have had to retrofit Caleb's genealogy. So when I say Caleb is lion-ish, I don't mean Caleb's the lion. I mean Caleb is giving us the very first inkling that there's a stolen identity problem here, that they went back and tried very messily to fix. And if you don't understand that, go on back. We already covered Caleb. We're going to see coming up that Solomon, you think Caleb was lionish. Where do we get to Solomon? That's coming up. I didn't want to address Solomon yet because we're getting there in Luke. But when we do get there in Luke, we're going to take a nice long little side trail and talk about Solomon. Oh, yeah, he's a good one, too, that they love to just gloss over Solomon. Then we've got Babylon. And everyone hears about Babylon being the lion. And we went through that a few sessions ago, either in Luke or here. I don't remember. They all start to mix together. And we think of Babylon as the lion, the empire, right? Guys, the only empire wasn't Babylon. And as a matter of fact, Babylon's the devouring lion. Maybe he devours, but the real lion is the empire that takes over after Babylon destroys it. Do you ever notice how Cyrus the Great, whenever you hear these guys talking, Babylonian exile was so horrid, and they destroyed the whole identity. But benevolent Cyrus the Great sent them back and let them rebuild Solomon's temple. And therefore, the ancient religion was saved. There's the narrative. They're also lying. That's not what happened. We're going to find out a little more about the benevolent Persia today. So the goal overall is to establish the lion not as attached to one single empire, but to attach it to the idea of empire takeover and stolen identity. That's the lion in Genesis 49. So let's see if we can establish that today. And then the keys just keep getting handed from empire to empire to empire. But Persia was the first. And eventually, today we'll see how this impacts Paul. And when we get there, we'll see how it impacts Solomon. So take a look at this. This is what people think. There's a lion. This isn't a lion. This is marketing. Oh, look. This is marketing. Here it is again. This is marketing. For sure. Because the Lion of Judah is a 19th and 20th century marketing campaign. Wonder why? Wonder why it popped up then. Well, theosophy. We needed a cosmic Christ to come and save the world as Revelation Inc. starts getting started. And you're seeing Revelation Inc. really start to get popular these days. It's really getting loud out there. The volume on Revelation Inc. is getting turned way up. Well, that started all the way back with theosophy. And crazy enough, political Zionism, they all coincide. I'm just going to let you go ahead and reflect on that. Get out your tinfoil hats and see if you guys can put those three things together with our Lion of Judah marketing campaign. Perhaps it's just a coincidence. So what the sources show, and this is ancient origins, and when I search this, guys, all the search engines and search results agree on the same really limited facts. Lion imagery began in this Genesis 49 thing. Okay, so there is an image that's connected to this Jacob's blessing. But here's the problem in the search. Yeah, it wasn't a blessing. Read the first sentence, Genesis 49. This Genesis 49 is a collective bitch slap of all of the tribes right after the Abrahamic covenant was handed down in 48. This isn't a blessing. This is a correction, right? We've already been through this. They're not reading the first sentence, and they're certainly calling all this weird shit a blessing. Okay? It's not a blessing. It's Jacob's bitch slap, disinheriting the rest of the tribes. That's what Genesis 49 is. Okay? But everyone's been programmed to think of it as a blessing for a Judah-centric worldview. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back. We've done this 100 times. Judah's called a young lion. That's a cub, not a conquering predator. Either way, the lion becomes this tribal emblem, but it's not a messianic identity. Revelation uses the Lion of Judah, but we know all about that, don't we? And the lion immediately gets replaced with the lamb. None of the sources anywhere show early Christians calling Jesus the lion, early church fathers building doctrine around lion imagery, any liturgy, creeds using lion symbolism. There's not even medieval theology centering Jesus as the lion, because it simply didn't happen. Just didn't happen. And what they don't show is there's just no historical evidence for continuous Lion of Judah Christology. There's no doctrinal tradition as Jesus is a lion, returning or otherwise. The early church use of lion imagery for Jesus or Christ or their logos or anything, there's nothing there. There's no medieval or Reformation lion theology attached to this Christ figure. It jumps right from Genesis to Revelation, straight to modern symbolism. We've got 1,800 years of a gap. That tells us this modern branding is not ancient, it's marketing. Why? Because word games, it's the number one tool for hiding an agenda. When you control the vocabulary, the definitions, the categories, the labels, the propaganda, and the marketing, you control the conversation. That's why the moment you ask, can you define that and how you're using it? Everything wobbles. The whole system depends on inherited meaning, assumed definitions, merged category, retrofitted theology, emotional buzzwords, which all go in to marketing. Controlling the narrative. Why are narratives controlled? Well, political agendas. Every empire that has ever touched the text, every single one of them had a motive. And if you can identify the motive, you can identify the edits, strip them away to get to the real original story, a whole lot closer than any scholars are willing to do today, because they'll lose their paycheck, and much closer than any priest or rabbi or preacher is ever going to get you. Just by that. Assyria broke the tribal identity. Babylon erased monarchy and land claims. Persia centralized the law, create Jew as a legal category, and introduces cosmic dualism. Greece, everything gets philosophical. Rome, universalize, flattens, and de-Judaize once they get their hands on Christianity. I'm not talking about Rome in the first century. I'm talking about Rome, Constantine, and post-Constantine. The church fathers, they're all about metaphysics, the Trinity, the eternal Son. Medieval church, sacrament control. Reformation, justification, vocabulary wars. They didn't like that the Catholic Church had the power, but they sopped up their doctrine like pigs at the trough, never walked away and audited the church fathers' doctrine. They only fought for power and jurisdiction. When you start to see it that way, you realize the Bible itself is not confusing. The layers are. The text itself, the story arc, really simple. Davidic king with a promise. Covenant story running through that bloodline. Tribal identity, loyalty to one God. Resurrection as a vindication and proof of overriding the death contract in the garden. Kingdom restoration. And everything unfolds. That's where you are in the timeline. You're in the everything is unfolding part, and you're missing it. Kingdom's here. It's active. It's unfolding. And you're missing it. Waiting for end times. This whole confusion comes from Persian cosmology, Greek metaphysics, Roman universalism, medieval scholasticism, Protestant legalism, all slapped together with modern branding. They're all stacked on top of each other like a theological lasagna. And we're just peeling back those layers. And today, well, our layer's got to be Persia. So what can we do with this overwhelming amount of BS that's been stacked on top of each other? Let me give you the key to institutional kryptonite tonight. The first thing we just talked about was know what lens you're in and know what lens they are in. Whoever you're talking to, debating with, listening to, right? If you're hearing a sermon or you're hearing something online or you're reading an article or you're just or you're reading a text from the Bible, what lens are they coming from? And how are you looking at it? Once you have the lens established, it gets very easy. All you got to do is insist that every single term is defined. If every single person stood up to scholars and said, "Excuse me, can you define exactly what you mean by ancient Hebrew Bible? Do you mean that's, there's a orthographic system? No, that's not what you mean. Oh, could you tell me what you mean by Judah? Could you please explain Hebrew to me? Which form of the word Jew are you using? When you say Israel, what exactly Babylon, Persia, which part of that? Post-exile, which one? Assyria? If you ask them to define their terms, Christ, which one? David Christ? Jesus, the anointed son, man of the Galilee? Or cosmic fancy pants being with magical sperm that the Roman Catholics made up? Which one? Demand that they, in every term, demand they define their terms. That's the first one. Yeshua, which one? Is that the son of David or is that the magical cosmic being that Paul taught? Which one? Define your terms. As soon as you do that, half of it falls away. If they try to blur the term, clarify it back to them using your definition. Oh, I'm sorry. You said you were talking about which Yeshua? Wait. You told me that you defined Christ as Jesus, son of David. You're talking about Christ in a different way now. Could you define that for me, please? Are we changing definitions? Because you're contradicting yourself. Whoa. I thought you said that was Babylon. Are you talking about Persia? Or are you talking about Assyria? Or are you talking about Babylon? Which exile? Yeah, when you say Jew, are you talking about the legal category or something else? That's what we have to start doing, is questioning people on these terms because they're playing a word game with you. And until we figure that out, never going to get anywhere. And they control the narrative. The next thing to do, go straight to the text. What does it say? If the scholars and the preachers can't even tell you what it says, they sure as hell can't tell you what it means. If I hear Genesis 49 one more time, here's my question. What does the first sentence in that chapter say? Oh, well, it's the blessings. What does the first sentence say? Let's just read the first sentence together and let's see what it says. Oh, now that we're on the same page, now we can continue. Does that make sense? They're cherry picking their way around because no one's nailing them on the things that matter and holding their feet to the fire to define their terms and read what's there before they tell you what it means. That's guys, this is second grade. They're literally fooling the whole world with second grade word games. That's what they're doing. Refuse to change the subject when they try to cherry pick. If you're nailing them on Genesis 48, don't let them jump to Revelation 5. You've got that answer, but don't let them go there, right? If you're talking about Micah, don't let them jump to Isaiah. You talk about what's there in front of them in that scroll with their terms defined in that lens. I guarantee the bullshit would stop tomorrow. No one's doing it. Probably because no one's literate enough about the Bible. There is so much biblical illiteracy out there, and that's one of the things we're trying to fix. But that's their kryptonite, guaranteed. Nobody comes at me anymore because I hold them to that every single time. People won't even debate me. Perhaps because I'm an asshole, and I'm okay with that. Or because I force them into that framework, and they don't want to do it. So the symbol of the Lion of Judah is ancient, rooted in Genesis and in Revelation, which we already know. But the modern Christian Lion of Judah, Jesus is the warrior king, that's a marketing campaign, and it's not adjacent to the doctrine. It's adjacent to modern politics. That's what it is. So let's take a look at biblical lions that are actually there and not just made up by modern marketing campaigns. And we're going to rewire our schema around these lions today. So we know that lion 1.0 is Caleb, right? Stealing identity by being called Judah and taking land when he really wasn't Judah. Okay, that's the problem. It's the identity theft. That's what the lion does. Esau's masquerading as Judah, taking over the land. And they retrofitted him on purpose. Lion 2, well, that's going to be Solomon. And when we learn about him, you're going to realize that he made covenant the same as empire. And that's a big problem. He also merged sacrifice and covenant together. And those two things allowed everything that came after it to build on it like lasagna. All roads don't lead to Rome. All roads lead to Persia, back to Solomon, and then wind around to Egypt. He demoted God of his father, David, and made him just another temple. Just another God in just another temple. That's what Solomon did. There was no loyalty in Solomon. Lion 3.0 is Babylon, and that shows the destruction, collapses, conquest. It symbolizes what happens when you don't follow the rules, right? And we've all heard that sermon before. It's like kind of like saying, you want that? You want those gods? Have those gods. Your self-governance is gone. That's your consequence. That's Babylon. But that's not where the story ends. That's where the sermon ends. That's not where the story ends. Because then we have Persia, the great lion that came in with empire, religion. Assyria is actually our first empire. This is the empire everyone forgets. But it's also the one that changed everything first. So what Assyria did was destroy the northern kingdom, had mass deportations, scattering tribes all across the empire, everywhere and beyond. It created the first large-scale diaspora. It shattered tribal identity, and it completely ended the northern cult centers. Ephraim disappears politically, and quote-unquote Judah becomes the last tribe standing. But we know they're not, okay? We know they're not because there's other tribes still there and still in the south. We also know that Judah was also scattered with the north when they came in and attacked Judah. They didn't make it all the way through, but they did take some. And we'll talk about that probably when we get to Micah. So what the scholars do, well, they ignore it. They don't completely ignore it, they minimize it because it just doesn't fit. The Babylon and Return from Babylon hero story and the ease of just, well, we'll just equate Babylon with judgment and then everyone comes back and it's just all Jewish now. That's the sermon arc. And Assyria happening before is really inconvenient to that. Assyria is the reason the North never comes back. Then we've got Babylon. So what Babylon actually did was Babylon, think of it as your wrecking ball, okay? Babylon is your wrecking ball. And this is the empire that scholars obsess over, mostly because it's theologically convenient. So they destroyed the southern kingdom of Judah. The exiles were the elites, but they left the peasantry behind. They destroyed the temple, ended the monarchy. There was a lot of trauma, but there was zero theological innovation. They lose land, king and temple, Solomon's temple, but not its identity. Scholars exaggerate Babylon because Babylon judgment fits the sermon better than Assyria does. Because with Babylon, we can celebrate the return home and the return to the quote-unquote original story. Let's find out if this return from Babylon rebooted the quote-unquote original story, shall we? Because who's next? That's Persia. This is the empire that actually rewired Judaism, but scholars avoid naming it. They tack it on to the back of Babylon. They don't separate it out and discuss what really happened here. Well, Persia created the province of Yehud, the origin of the word Jew. They defined Jew as a Persian legal category, not an ethnic one. It was a way of administering the law, period. They rebuilt Solomon's temple, installed a priesthood, and funded the cult. They introduced resurrection, angels, demons, dualism, Satan as a cosmic enemy, apocalyptic worldview, 2 ages, and Judgment Day. I'm not kidding. They codified Torah as imperial law. They created a Second Temple Judaism as we know it. Everything that Jesus and Paul inherit is touched and shaped by Persia. That's the world they step into. And it's avoided by scholars because it reveals how completely foreign the entire system actually is. The empire, Persia, is the architect. It builds the entire legal, religious system that Jesus walks into. It builds the cosmology that Paul walks into and adopts. It's the foundation of all of Judaism and Christianity. And it attempts to backdate itself to appear original. And that last one, that's why you can't name it. Because if you say they're attempting to backdate it to appear original, well, the foundation of Judaism and Christianity shatter. And that's what you're starting to see, the cracks. The cracks are everywhere. And that dam is going to break. Persia creates the legal category, Judean. Now, we know all about legal categories because we've been talking about this all with Paul and James, right? In what legal category Rome had. There were 2 legal categories under Rome. You could be under the Jewish umbrella and follow those laws, or you could be under the pagan umbrella and follow those laws. Guess who started that? Persia. Paul later treats that category of Judean, a legal category, a place to file your paperwork like the DMV. And he changes it to mean covenant people. That's the root of the entire confusion. In Persia, Judean is a legal resident of the province of Judea. Period. It is not a tribe. It does not mean covenant heir. It does not mean descendant of David. It is not even a spiritual category. It's not an ethnic category. It's literally a Persian administrative bucket. You're Kentuckian and you're Tennessean. Done. Which DMV do I go to? Well, are you from Kentucky and following those laws? Or are you from Tennessee and following those laws? It's literally what it was. The only reason anything religious is tacked onto this is because what did we learn? Religion is law and law is religion. You're going to see that today when we get to the Torah. Wait do you learn about this one? Oh, yeah, the Torah. We're getting there. We're getting there. So how this manifests with Paul is he decides that this legal category of people are covenant people. And Gentiles are not covenant people. He's taking the legal Persian binary and puts covenant spiritual meaning onto it as though they are God's administrative buckets. Jew and Gentile doesn't come from God. It doesn't come from David. It doesn't even come from Solomon, that little bastard. It doesn't come from Babylon. It comes from Persia. Persia made two buckets to control the populations because religion was law. So they needed law. That's the sleight of hand. Your Torah law is just Persian civil law. If you live here, you must follow those laws, and you are called Judean. Done. If you don't live there, you don't have to follow those laws, and you are not called Judean. Done. That's what Persia did. Paul attached God's covenant people to those living there. That's what happened, guys. It's freaking ridiculous. Now, Persia's a trip. So here's our Persia mini lesson today. We're going to talk about cosmology, impacting Pharisees, impacting Paul. We've got our angel and our psalm and our legal categories, and that ultimately leads to the binary. So the core imports in Persian cosmology. Persia didn't just conquer land. It conquered worldview. And here's the 5 big ones that matter for our understanding. We've got dualism, which is 2 cosmic forces, light versus darkness, truth versus lie, good versus evil, and that's the backbone of Pharisee and Pauline thinking. One or the other. There's no gray areas. Light and dark. This is dualism, okay? And it's applied in a cosmic sense and in a human sense. So this is where Gnosticism flows out from. And it's a sleight of hand. And once you see that, it all makes sense. It all makes sense. What else did we get from Persia? Well, angels as cosmic administrators. Not just messengers, but actual bureaucrats of heaven. They're your heavenly DMV, if you will. They enforce the law. They guard the nations. They oversee judgment. All that Persian. So what does Persia do next? They literally write the quote-unquote Torah. The Torah did not exist before Persia. Sit with that. There is no ancient book that fell out of Moses's lap with all of these laws in it. Okay? That's Persian law to keep the people under control. Now, did this law come from oral traditions and whatnot? Yes. But let me make a comparison for you. Okay? I want you to imagine that it's, I don't know, the year 1800. Okay? 1900, maybe 1980. All of the Native Americans from the United States all sit down together and say, okay, guys, we want to collect all of our tribal mythologies, all of our stories handed down from our ancestors, all of the rules that all of our individual tribes of people have followed. Now, sometimes our tribal laws are going to be similar. Sometimes they're going to be different. Sometimes we might make shit up to throw in there because it's 1980, okay? And then we're going to put all of this, and sometimes our gods will look the same, and our stories will look the same. So we're going to kind of stitch it together to look good, and then we're going to put it in a book, and we're going to say, we did this because Sitting Bull said so. That's literally what happened in Persia, and they called it the Torah. They stamped this written civil law. Okay? They stamp it with Moses said so, but also the angels gave the law. And of course, those two things completely don't contradict themselves. That's what they did. They took the Moses tradition from the folks who were already there and said, yeah, okay, we'll keep Moses, but we're going to throw our own angel spin on it because that's what we think. And they tied it all together. That's what they did. They called it the Torah. Now, the Persian codified civil law called the Torah. This is codified in the Persian period. That means Elephantine not having Torah makes sense. Early prophets not quoting Torah makes sense. Contradictions make sense. All the doublets that you see make sense. Seams and rips in the text that just don't add up make sense. The Moses attribution makes sense. Random angels doing random shit all of a sudden makes sense. The late language makes sense. The Persian cosmology overlays, well, those make sense. It's sort of like turning the lights on in a room that everyone insisted was pitch black. And now you can see it all. Once you realize the Torah was not suggestions. The Torah was not religious rules to follow because you've chosen to be part of a religion. That is not what Torah means. It means that today if you're Hebrew roots and growing your beard. It means that to you.
What do we say? I say, hey, hey, you, get out of my cloud. Hey, hey, you, get out of my cloud. Hey, hey, you, get out of my cloud. Going around, boy, to the ground, on my cloud.
Okay? To them, it meant you live there. This is your law. Period. I don't give a shit what you believe. This is your law. I don't care if you don't believe in registering your car at the DMV. The law says you go to the DMV and you put a sticker on your car. So you go to the DMV and put a sticker on your car, whether you believe in it or not. You stop at a stop sign, not because you believe in it, because the law says stop at the frickin' stop sign. You bring a bird to the temple, not because you believe in it, but because the law says bring a frickin' bird to the temple. You don't work on Sabbath, not because you believe not working on the, but because the law says you don't. That's what Persia did. A man with crushed testicles cannot come into the synagogues. Why? I don't give a shit about a man with crushed testicles, but the Torah says so. Why? Because civil law, Persian codified civil law, was the Torah, with Moses and angels slapped right on top of it. Now that you know that, well, you should be able to figure out the Pharisees didn't even exist until after the Torah, which means they existed after Persia, which means they're not original either. And you can see now why scholars don't talk about what happened during the Persian Empire in Israel. So let's keep going because it keeps getting better. It just keeps getting better. Resurrection of the righteous. That's Persian, not Davidic. And we're going to talk about that because that's going to freak a lot of people out. Jesus's teaching is eternal life. Okay. Persian teaching is resurrection at a final judgment. And that's two very different things. But for now, no. Resurrection was not a Davidic idea, nor was it a Davidic covenant idea. And we'll get really deeper into this when we get to that part in Luke, okay? But just know. Oh, God, this is going to piss so many people off when I say this. All right. Because it's going to jam up their entire end times eschatology. Again, there I go, fucking off Revelation Inc. and taking the worry away from people about when the asteroid's coming. Shame on me. But what was actually the mindset without this Persian influence is that Jesus, the resurrection, according to Jesus, right, was sweeping up the backlog of people who were dead, right? Which makes sense because Adam signed a death contract. Humanity, dead. Jesus resurrects the dead, right? The people who are dead, that the open Sheol. All the dead souls come out. They were sleeping, right? Not dead, not dead. Because Jesus beat death. Well, if Jesus beat death, sorry, preachers, that means he's offering eternal life. And Jesus speaks in the present tense. The kingdom is here. The kingdom is open. You have eternal life now because I've opened the kingdom. It's ongoing. You don't need to die and resurrect 2,000 years from now. We're not waiting. You go right into the kingdom. You pass from life to kingdom. The resurrection was for the already dead. So this whole end of times, cosmic, massive judgment, that's Paul. That's Paul. And people immediately go, oh, well, separating the sheep and the goats. But you're putting a Persian overlay on Jesus's cosmology and David's cosmology and Hebrew cosmology. And they're two different things. Okay? We'll get there. We'll get there when we get there. But I'm just going to throw that out so that when we get there, you've already heard it, and maybe people won't flip their shit quite so much. But yeah, the resurrection of the righteous and some final cosmic bema seat thing, that's Paul. That's not Davidic. But the Pharisees adopt that view. Paul builds his entire theology on it. They also come up with the two ages, this age which is corrupt, and the age to come, which is restored. That's Persian. Sorry. This also becomes a Pharisee timeline and Paul's entire end times eschatology that people are still following now. 2,000 years later, they haven't figured it out. Maybe Paul was wrong. Just saying. We're still here. Let's see what else. Oh, there'll be scoffers in the last days. Yeah. Okay, Paul. Persia also came up with the idea of the cosmic judgment day. That's the final sorting we talked about with the resurrection thing. This final sorting of humanity, the final sorting, that's Zoroastrianism. Now, these ideas did not exist in David's world. They appear after Persia, and they're defined in the Second Temple worldview. The Second Temple worldview is defined by Persia, and these beliefs define the religion that came in with Persia that slapped David's name on it, slapped Moses's name on it, and slapped word Judah on it. But it's Persian. It's not Hebrew. So, sorry, Judaism, you're just Persian. Just saying.
It's 3 a.m. There's too much noise that the people never wanna go to bed. That just keep feeling so good, you have to drive me out of my head. What do we say? I said, hey, you, get on my cloud. Hey, you, get on my cloud. Hey, you, get on my cloud. Don't hang around, boy. To the cloud, on my cloud. Oh, yes. I was sick of time, but over this, I decided to take a drive downtown.
So if you're a Jew, well, you're Persian. You're following Zoroastrianism. Good. Thank you very much. Just like I said that all Christians are Catholics and all Catholics are Jews. Well, now all Jews are Zoroastrian. So all of y'all just go to Persia. Fine, you're done. If you stop at the Second Temple period and that's your worldview and you think that's original, well, you're originally Persian, which is why everyone is flipping their shit because no one's peeling back the layer. So, how all this created the Pharisees? Well, Pharisees are not something biblical or Davidic, at least. They're Persian era legal engineers, if you will, because Persia needed local administrators, law interpreters, purity enforcers, identity managers to handle this takeover of the land. I told you, Persian was your law, your very administrative society. So the Pharisees became this purity police, legal interpreters, civil law. Remember, the Torah is civil law, not a religious choice. I don't care what you believe in. You have to go and bring the bird to the temple. That, see what I'm saying? The DMV. It wasn't religious. Okay? It was run by a priesthood because there is no separation of church and state. But the religious law is the civil law, regardless of what you believe. You didn't have a choice. Remember David, right? His 6-step sacrifice. You don't have a choice. There was no separation of church and state. The religious law was the civil law. So they became resurrection believers angel cosmology enforcers, your enforcing angels, those destroying angels, all those angels we've been talking about, those darn little enforcers, those enforcers. Synagogues popped up everywhere. We needed synagogue teachers because you can't have a population following the law if you're not teaching the population the law. They became the guardians of the Persian-shaped Torah. Pharisees are literally the Persian civil religious bureaucracy wearing quote unquote Jewish clothing. That's what they are. Welcome to Persia. Oh, this is going to be a popular one, I can tell. I just know it. So their whole worldview was civil law Torah. And sure, some of it, I'm sure, goes back to Moses, right? And traditions handed down. Like I said, think of Native Americans all sitting down and getting together and think, here's our laws. And by the way, since it's 2010, we want to add some stuff, right? And that's why you see weird shit in there. Like, don't drive on the wrong side of the street. You're like, why would that be there from like Moses's day? It doesn't make sense. Well, because Moses didn't say it, right? There's some Moses things in there. There's some Hebrew things in there. It's evolving. But by the time Persia comes and quote unquote writes the Torah, that's a Persian civil law document, guys. It is not falling out of the sky with Moses's fingerprints on it from God. Okay. It's the Persian civil law plus Persian cosmology, an obsession with purity, and all of their legal arguments and interpretation. That's the Pharisee worldview. So how did this shape Paul? Well, Paul's a Pharisee, right? But he's living outside of the land of Judea. And this is interesting because you have buckets, right? You've got these Persian legal buckets. You're Judean or you're everyone else. Well, even if you're not living in the land, you can still follow the rules of the land, which means they still have authority over you if you register as that. I'm going to give you an example, okay? When I moved to Saudi Arabia, they ask your religious affiliation, okay? Not because I was discriminated based on my religion, like you might think like, oh, we've got a Christian coming into an Islamic. It wasn't like that. It wasn't like that. They have law based on religion, okay? But there are pieces that do not apply to me as a foreigner and as a person who is not part of that religion. Does that make sense? And I want, so think of that. They're putting me in a bucket, not based on my theology, just based on the law and how the law applies to me. They're bucketing me not as American, they're bucketing me as religious group. Does that make sense? I want you to think of this as Paul is still under the law of the Judean bucket from the Persians that got handed down as it went. So even though it's Rome, okay, Rome just inherited these buckets. They didn't change anything. They just left it in place from Persia, okay, just passed along down the line. So what Persia went and put in place, every empire after that kept. Now, Paul's not living in Judea. Paul's living over in Tarsus, but he's still under Judean law and reach. Sort of like if I moved to Scotland, the government still taxes me. Now you see it, okay? Same thing. They still want to collect basically the tax. So they still expect you to do certain things that are aligned with their law. That's how this is working. So Paul inherits Persian dualism, resurrection ideas, all the angelology, is that how you say it? Angelology, Persian cosmic conflict, the 2 ages with the final sorting, and the legal categories. This is his worldview that was imported from Persia. So, Paul's Christ character is built on a Persian savior archetype, Persian resurrection logic, Persian cosmic battle, Persian judgment day, and Persian angelic mediation. It's so hard to get Paul out of the brain because all of this literally is Christianity. But it's not. It's Persianity. Maybe we'll start calling it, instead of Paulianity, I think we'll start calling it Persianity. And here's what's happening. Because this is so clear, I want to show you. Oh, shoot. I want to show you this link. Why don't I have this link? Here it is. Share this tab instead. The Unholy Truth by Tanner the Humanist. Well, Tanner, I've got news for you. How Christianity stole from Zoroastrianism. Before Jesus, there was Zoroaster. And more of your Bible than you think comes from him. This was just written August 2025. Okay? And they're talking all about this Zoroastrianism. When Christians attacked it in the 6th century, they weren't confronting a strange or alien religion. They were clashing with the very faith that had already shaped their own. Now, when people say Christianity stole Zoroastrianism, that's just a really handy marketing scheme, because what they should say is how the Persian Empire hijacked Judea, and all of Judaism and all of Christianity was built on Persia lying about who they were and stealing the identity. That's what they should say. That's what the title of the article should be, right? How the Persians came in and pretended to be Israel. That's what they should. They're not saying that. They'll never say that.
I was so in quite a peace when there was nobody, not a soul around. I laid myself down, I was so tired, I started to drink.
They'll never say that because they can't. In my tinfoil hat opinion, here's what I'm going to say. Go down the Persian bloodline rabbit hole, and that's all I'm going to tell you. That's all I'm going to say about that, relating it to modern times. But this bloodline, this ancient Persian bloodline, has its hands, well, in everything. In everything. If you're a conspiracy person, find the Persian bloodlines, trace that. It's everywhere. It's a little creepy. It's a little creepy once you start to look into this. Okay. All the stolen identities throughout century after century after century, and religion after religion after religion, and New Age, and secret society group, and land ownership, and world leaders, and heads of state. It really starts to get creepy. Trace the bloodlines. That's all I'm saying. But we don't talk about modern stuff. We talk about ancient stuff, and that's where we are. And I think that's why nobody wants to talk about the Persian Empire stealing the identity of peasantry Judah, taking their religion, their true Hebrew religion, and making it their own and turning it into something else, slapping Judah's name on it, slapping David's name on it, slapping Moses's name on it, claiming Abraham, and running with it. Everyone complains about, Judah stealing the identity of Israel. Well, yeah, but Judah didn't do that. Persia did. Persia, pretending it's Judah, stole the identity of everybody else. So Persia steals the identity of Judah. And then as Judah, wearing Judah's costume, they also steal the identity of Israel. That's what you're seeing. You're seeing multiple levels of lasagna layered, and all roads point to Persia. All right. So, but that doesn't mean that we can't find leftovers of what the original Hebrew covenant people believed. That backbone, guys, the Davidic promise, the Davidic covenant is still there. It's just not Persian. And it's just, resurrection just doesn't look the way Paul said. We have to reread it through Jesus goggles rather than Paul goggles. And it all clicks into place. Have to switch the frame. That's all. Take out a Persian framing and put on Jesus framing. And we do that the best we can here. So hopefully we'll get there. Angels gave the law, 100% Persian. In their thought, divine law is mediated. Angels deliver it, and angels enforce it. That's why you're getting the destroying angels, the enforcing angels, and the cursing angels back in Psalm 78. Now you understand Paul. They guard the nations. They judge the dead. It all makes sense now. It all makes sense what Paul is thinking. The Pharisees adopt this. Paul inherits this worldview. Acts references it. And Hebrew reinforces it as well. The book of Hebrews. That's why one time I said, oh, there's a lion thing in the book of Hebrews, and we ain't going there because Hebrews is a whole other rabbit hole. Well, we're digging in that rabbit hole right now. So Psalm 78, now it makes a whole lot more sense. It clicks into place even more because this was your Persian political priesthood and scribal rewrite. The Ephrathites are erased. Ephraim's cursed. Judah becomes the golden child. David becomes tribal Judah, not location Judah. Zion becomes Jerusalem. The ruling king lineage, all covenants, Judah. It's ours now. Genesis 49, done. The cub from Genesis 49 is officially under the lion's scepter when Persia comes in. Because you know why? Because God chose us, not them. Well, who is us? Who is us? Us is Persia. That's who us is. The chosen people. Not Babylon. Not Assyria. Not Greece. Not Rome. Not northern Israel. Not peasantry. Southern Judah. Persia. Your chosen people now are Persia. Sorry. What do you think? What do you think David thinks about that? So, Persia is where we get the Judean pagan binary, or otherwise known as Jew-Gentile. This was administrative civil law, not theology. They were legal categories. Persia invented Judean. It's not an ethnicity, not a tribe, not a religion. It was a legal status in the Persian Empire. Period. And the binary is born because Persia wanted to know where to file your paperwork. Everyone else were ethnos, pagan, nation person. It's really what it means. This was not a moral category. It was not a spiritual category. It was not a theological category. It may have been religious because religion and civil law are the same. But religion and theological are different. This was not a theological category. It certainly wasn't a covenant category. It's a Persian administrative bucket. You're Judean. You are a member of the province of Judea, excuse me, not Judah, Judea. And there's everyone else. That's it. That's all it meant until Paul. This is the binary Paul inherits, and that the Pharisees enforce to keep their power because they're enforcing civil law like the Saudi police. This is a binary the temple cartel uses. And it's the binary that Rome adopts because why not? It's already organized for them. So why did this create so much confusion? Because it's legal, not religious. It's not ethnic. It's not religious. It's not covenantal. It's not tribal. It's not spiritual. It's literally a legal category. And guess who's trying to bring that legal category back? And the dipshit evangelicals are like, yeah, let's do Noahide laws. Dummies. This is the binary the temple power structure uses that Rome adopts. But unfortunately, later on, different groups of people start using it as a race, a religion, theology, identity, metaphysics, and God said so. But the original administrative category somehow becomes a cosmic category in Paul's letters. Weird. Because that is where all the madness begins. And we're still living in it 2,000 years later. So in the Persian system, Judean is not an ethnicity. It's not a religion. It's not a tribe. It's a legal jurisdictional category, period. Full stop, no wiggle. And this is the part that scholars blur. But we're going to be razor sharp consistent about it. This is the word that eventually turns into Jew. So scholars say post-Babylon because it's theologically safe. They avoid saying post-Persia because it blows up the whole entire system. Babylon's an easy villain, but Persia is the empire that actually rewired Judaism. If scholars started saying post-Persia Judaism or Persian legal categories or Persian cosmology, Persian resurrection doctrine, Persian angelology, that's that word again, I can't say, or Persian dualism, Persian apocalypticism. Dude, every Jew and every Christian around the world would flip their ever-loving shit. And suddenly, the entire Second Temple period looks foreign, not Hebrew, not Moses, not David, certainly not Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Ephraim. But it begins to look very familiar. That is a theological Nightmare. So they hide Persia with a little hyphen right after Babylon. Because Babylon didn't change the religion. Babylon destroyed the infrastructure. Persia rebuilt the religion, brought in their own, slapped everyone's name on it, and called it Judah. Babylon was the demolition crew. Persia were the architects of the new system. Sure, there was a temple. Everything else? Oh, that was Persian. Babylon destroyed Solomon's temple, destroyed the monarchy, destroyed the land, destroyed the priesthood, destroyed the political identity. But Persia? Oh, those guys, they rebuild Solomon's temple. They reinstate and appoint a priesthood. They appoint a priesthood. They codify and write the Torah. These are your Moses said so laws. They create a providence, and they define the word Jew as a legal category. They introduce resurrection doctrine, angels and demons, the whole apocalyptic worldview, cosmic judgment, the age to come, and scripture. Their scripture, called the Torah, now becomes law. Assyria Empire gets erased because, well, it doesn't fit the theological narrative. They invented mass deportation. They completely destroyed the Northern Kingdom, scattered the tribes, created the whole diaspora to begin with, erased Ephraim's political power, set the stage for all of Judah's propaganda. But we don't talk about Assyria because Assyria doesn't fit the covenant punishment sermon arc as neatly as Babylon does. Why? Because everything starts with Persia. It's the original. Babylon, Persia, Second Temple period, Second Temple period. That's when the original Hebrew faith got rebooted because Cyrus the Great was so generous with it. That's the story. Syria doesn't collapse two houses into one supporting Persian rewrites. They talk about Assyria. They have to talk about two houses. They don't want to do that. There's one house. There's one house. And that house is Persian. And it started post-Babylon. So scholars minimize Assyria, exaggerate Babylon, erase Persia completely. Just don't look there. Don't look there. This is not accidental. They know better. It's narrative convenience. It guarantees their paychecks if they ignore it. But Persia's the real turning point. Acknowledging that would expose how much of Judaism and Christianity are just Persian hybrids. From the Pharisees to the cosmology, straight up to Paul. All of it comes from Persia. All of it. All of it, 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 all of it. Frankly, that's too much Persia for comfort. The Jews are not comfortable with Persia. That's too close to comfort. You think Christians are comfortable with Persia? No. Pretend it's not there. They hide it under the word Babylon. Babylon's used because it's a theological symbol, not a historical category. In the Bible, Babylon is covenant collapse, cosmic treason, exile, judgment. So post-Babylon sounds like post-judgment, post-punishment, post-sin. It fits the sermon. Post-Persia, well, that doesn't fit the sermon because it actually have to teach you some history. That's the whole problem. We're not imagining it, not overthinking it, not missing something, not committing heresy. We're just saying the thing the scholars are paid to say. but don't want to say out loud. Well, I can't say that. Scholars aren't paid to say this. A scholar's job should be to tell you the truth, but it's not. Scholars are working under institutional capture. They're paid to not tell you the truth. Scholars are controlled opposition to keep you running in circles, protecting the institution because they don't want you to figure out the truth and add up all the pins. Scholars get paid to support the institutional narratives, not to tell you the truth. Although a scholar's job should be researching the truth and telling the truth. Unfortunately, it isn't. Their job is to contain the story. We call that controlled opposition. We call that Bart Ehrman. We call that James Tabor. We call that Michael Heiser. And boy, are they getting nice fat paychecks, to not mention Persia. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The group appears to be legitimate, but its actions are ultimately ineffective or self-defeating, allowing the ruling party to remain in power without facing any genuine challenges. The ruling party may infiltrate, influence, or coerce to steer their platform to a direction that doesn't harm the institutions they serve. By leading the opposition themselves, the controlling entities or institutions can ensure that any criticism remains within acceptable boundaries, delegitimizing any more radical or authentic movements. So let's sit around and debate if Paul is Simon Magus, Dr. Price. Let's talk about Jesus versus Paul. Let's not talk about Persia or Judah or Ephrathites or genealogies. Let's not do that. They serve as a red herring because the control group can be used to distract constituents from the actual issues or to funnel dissenting energy straight into a dead end. Well, you see any of that going on out there? I do.
I said, hey, you, get out of my class. Hey, you, get out of my class. Hey, you, get out of my class. Don't hang around, boy. To the class. And I said, hey, you, get out of my class. Hey, get out of my class. Hey, you, get out of my class. Don't hang around, boy. To the class. On my class.
So when we're talking about the Second Temple period and the world that both Paul and Jesus stepped into, because Rome simply adopted these categories, right? And then sprinkled some Greek infiltration and philosophy on top of all of that, right? Well, you've got Judean, or in the Bible, you see it written as this Greek word that we always point out. And it means a person under the civil law called Torah of the Persian province of Judea. That's what it means. That's all it means. It's a census category. It's a tax category. It's a jurisdictional category. It's a legal status, a provincial identity. But what it's not is a belief system. It is not a religion. It is not a tribe. It is not an ethnicity. It is not a bloodline. And it's certainly not a covenant identity. In ancient times, people had cosmologies. People had philosophies. People had belief systems. People had theology. They did not have religion. There's a big difference there. This is why there's so many different sects with different belief systems, but they're all following the civil law of the Persian coded Torah, which have a lot of Persian laws, a few Hebrew laws, maybe some Moses thrown in for good measure, but it's got a giant administrative stamp on it that says, Moses said so. And by the way, angels gave it to you, so you better follow it. That's what's happening in the world Jesus and Paul are walking around in. And now it's under the military might of Rome. That entire system got handed and placed under the iron fist of Rome. But Persia's the one that created the province, the category. Greece translated it. Rome inherited it. And everything else, from Revelation Inc. to modern Zionism, to Hebrew roots, to Protestant Reformation, to church fathers, to Catholic doctrine, to Pollyanity, and, well, our Second Temple period. It's all theological spin to keep that binary alive so people can be categorized into groups. So the binary is Judean and everyone else. That's the whole legal map of the first century. There is no third category in Persian law or Roman law. There's no third category in the Torah, which is exactly why Jesus and James introducing a third category called the Tent of David. That's why it's so explosive, because it simply doesn't fit the empire's legal grid. Can't do that when church and state aren't separate. So why this matters so much for the Davidic framework is because once you define Judean, understand it as a legal category, not an ethnic group, not a covenant identity, then everything else that we've been mapping for months and months and months and months and years becomes crystal clear. The Babylon-Persia rewrite works only if Judean means all of Israel. They need the legal category to swallow the covenant category. They can't claim the covenant if they can't claim Israel. And they can't claim Israel if Israel does not equal Judean. Ephraim's covenant identity becomes completely invisible under the legal label because everyone is Judean. So Ephraim in Judah is legally Judean. Their tribal claim disappears and the remnant is erased. Paul's entire system depends on this legal fiction. He never restores any tribal identity. He never restores covenant categories. He never restores Genesis 48. He never restores Ephraim, never mind the Ephrathites. He never restores Zion. He never restores David's true lineage. He works entirely inside the Persian legal category, not the covenant category. Rome loves this. Rome wants two boxes: Judean in their ancestral law, although it's not really ancestral, it's Persian ancestral, and everyone else. And Paul's cosmic Jesus fits very neatly into that binary. But James, working that political tightrope after Jesus dies to reunite the tent of David under the kingdom Jesus just opened, that does not fit in this binary. So Paul's job is to collapse the third category. This is for everyone out there trying to figure out, does Paul work for Rome? Does Paul work for the high priest in the temple? That's Sadducees, old money, old guard. Is Paul working with the Herods? Is Paul just Greek? A Greek Hellenist? Is Paul working for the Pharisees? Who's Paul working for? What's he doing? The answer is yes. All of them. Because Paul's job is simply to collapse the third category, the tent of David. And to collapse a category, you don't attack it. You dissolve the boundaries that make it a category at all. So James and Peter, the tent of David is defined by covenant, justice, restoration, genealogy, Davidic kingship, rightful heirs, Ephraim's inheritance, Zion. It's about a people becoming a nation again with a king that crosses all boundaries and acts as the divine monarch of the lost sheep. Paul removes every single one of these, one by one. David's not Judah. He's Ephrathite in Judah. We know that. And this is the part that the priestly editors cannot let stand, because it blows up their entire post-exile legitimacy. The text itself says David's the Ephrathite, and Ephrath is Rachel's land grant. Not Rachel's, but it's Ephraim's land grant from Jacob's deathbed. It's Rachel's burial. These are Rachel's sons. It's where the Abrahamic covenant sits. And that's our covenant land marker. They attached it to Esau in the genealogies. Esau's Herod. This is why the editors had to fuse Ephrathite and Ephrath into Bethlehemite. They fused Bethlehem into Judah. They fused Judah into Davidic kingship. They fused David into Judah's eternal throne. It's a hostile takeover of covenant identity. But don't blame Judah. Blame Persia. Blame the Judah elites that sold out to Persia, not the peasantry people of the north or the south, regardless of tribal lineage or ethnicity. This is way beyond that. Psalm 78 is a smoking gun of their rewrite. It curses Ephraim with character assassination and actual ritual curse. Elevates Judah. It's narrative replacement. Tying David to Judah, tribal reassignment. It's not poetry. It's Persian imperial propaganda. It's Persian imperial propaganda is what it is. It's the Babylon-Persia priesthood rewriting the covenant map so that they become the rightful heirs. And 2,000 years later, we've still got Jews and Christians who have no idea. Micah exposes the lie that Zion's not Jerusalem. He's the one prophet who just refuses to play. He keeps saying Zion's the city of David, the Ephrathite stronghold. Jerusalem's the temple bureaucracy, post-exilic elite. They're not the same. The editors merge them to erase the Davidic origin and relocate the city of David to the temple-controlled capital. It's not geography. It's jurisdictional theft. It's inheritance theft. And they're still playing the same game today. Because the whole world followed the beast. That's why. The elites needed a Judah identity to rule. Because, well, Israel was already gone. There was no one there to complain. So they're like, well, Judah's still here. We'll just take that. And they would return. They had no land claim. They had no tribal legitimacy. These are dipshit elite politicians and priests. There's no covenant inheritance that went to them ever. There's no ancestral continuity. These are elites from Babylon and Persia, okay? They're not Judean people. They're not the Israel people. They're not the commoners that Jesus is always addressing. They're the elites that he's fighting. They stole the covenant story. They folded it into Judah, attached David, attached Zion, attached the kingship to themselves all over Chronicles. The covenant to their own priesthood. Even though Levi's not supposed to inherit shit. And that's how they became the legitimate rulers of the land in the original faith. They're the authors of the original faith. That's not the original faith. That's not representing the God of David, nor the God of Jesus. That's not their father. That's cheap identity laundering. That's what that is. Paul's job is to reinforce this system. Not the covenant of Genesis 48, not the Davidic promise. Paul's framework is angelic law, Persian cosmology, all of it. The Maskell interpretive logic. This is the part you guys are starting to see with forensic clarity. This is the part that you're seeing with clarity, but might not have the schema in the background, in the history, and the words to put it together. But Paul's a framework. He's been Pharisee trained in this Maskell, this teaching, this interpretive logic that includes that curse in Psalm 78. It's the anti-Ephraim erasure, the pro-Judah narrative, the cosmic Christ replacing tribal covenant, universalizing faith to dissolve any inheritance claims of the true king. And all of that just reinforces the post-exile narratives. Paul's Jesus is not the Davidic heir. Paul's Jesus doesn't restore the lost sheep. They don't even look for the lost sheep. Doesn't restore Ephraim's inheritance. And by Ephraim's inheritance, I mean the king. All the nations are supposed to follow the king. It's his rightful inheritance as the Messiah. That certainly doesn't restore any land or justice, self-governance, doesn't restore Rachel's sons, the Davidic throne. He ends the law, ends the identity, ends the restoration arc, ends the whole story. That's exactly what the Persian priesthood needed. That's why Psalm 78 was written to begin with. So we've got 4 power streams here. And then Paul's right in the middle of them. We've got the high priest and temple elite. Those are the guys that rewrote everything with their scribes, and they control the temple access, sacrifice system, festivals. This is Israel narrative. This is the original faith narrative. They're the heirs of the Babylon-Persian edit. These guys run the civil law. These guys, that's why you'll see The Sadducees don't believe in angels and resurrection and afterlife. They don't have to, because they're not a religious, theological group of people. They are running the civil law that you must bring a bird, a ram, or whatever, the bread, the taxes, the identity. That's what they're running. Okay? They're running an administrative business via temple sacrifice. They don't believe it. How could you sacrifice, right? The Sadducees don't believe in anything. Okay? They don't believe in an afterlife. If the Sadducees don't believe in an afterlife, what the hell are they sacrificing to? Like, put it together. It's an economy. It's civil law coded in for power and control of the people. It's our God now. You can't have him. That's what it is. They're selling indulgences like the Catholic Church. It's the same thing. They're the heirs. They're Judah. They're the chosen ones. David's their king. Zion's their Jerusalem. And Ephraim's a failure, not an heir in their worldview. That keeps their power in the temple. Then you've got your second stream of Pharisees. This gives street-level cred. This is the Maskell brain. They control the synagogue networks, the purity standards, all the interpretations of the law with all their scribes and legal experts. They're policing the narrative loyalty on the ground, right? They're controlling the people on the ground using the Persian Torah coded law. They translate all of this temple ideology into everyday life. So they're like the PR team and the enforcement arm of the Judah rewrite at the neighborhood level. Stream 3 is Rome. Now, this is our macro empire logic, and they have control through violence, law, order. They adopted all these legal categories, right? And it's either ancestral or a new cult. That's how they see it. Who gets to exist without getting crushed? Rome doesn't give a shit who Israel is, as long as it's one manageable category with one elite interface, which is your temple leadership. That keeps the locals quiet, and thank goodness we've got those Persian Pharisees on the ground with that power to keep policing them and keep everybody in line. That's your structure. This isn't religion, it's structure. Stream 4, we've got our Hellenized philo-type Judaism. This is your bridge out into the Greek world. And what they're in control of is this philosophical respectability. They add the Greek vocabulary for Jewish ideas. They talk about allegorical and cosmic frameworks. And, well, this stream of information is Israel's God is the universal logos, and law is the cosmic reason, and science and morality, and the symbol of the universe is the temple. It makes Judaism able to be exported intellectually. And Paul is standing in the middle of all four. He never attacks the Babylon, Persia, Judah edit head on. He doesn't restore Ephraim, Zion, or Gen 48. He works inside the jurisdiction of the high priesthood inherited. Okay? He's from the Pharisee stream, so he's trained in scripture, purity obsession, us, them, identity politics. But who commissioned him? The Epiphany. Thus, who does Paul work for? He works for the entity in the Epiphany. He doesn't work for Rome. He doesn't work for the high priest. He no longer works for the high priest. He no longer even works for this Pharisaical sect. He works for the entity. He doesn't work for the Herods. He hangs out with the Herods. He's very politically connected. He does things that benefit Rome. He does things that benefit the priesthood in Judea. But he works for the entity ever since the Epiphany in Acts 9. So what's his job? High control community rules, use inside-outside language, flesh versus spirit, massive polemics against his rivals. This is maskil behavior. He doesn't just argue. No, he delegitimizes any other covenant claims. He takes the Pharisee enforcement instinct and repurposes it. He's protecting the temple and law from the Jesus folks. But now, after Acts 9, he's protecting his own Jesus cult from the Ephraim-style covenant restoration. He's been commissioned to erase the third category. He detribalized identity. There's neither Jew nor Gentile. He made it deterritorialized. There's no covenant jurisdictional focus or boundary. He delegalized the covenant. There's no law. Portable communities in Roman cities, you can bring it everywhere. He makes his version of the movement safe for Rome and indirectly stabilizes the Judah elite as Rome's recognized managers. So what if James' Ephraim-friendly inheritance justice covenant restoration project wins? Well, Rome gets an Israel that actually wants sovereignty and actually follows the king. Temple elites lose their comfortable middle manager role. So how does Paul and the entity he works for destroy the third group? He doesn't attack it, he erases it. And the Jews, they're not going to tolerate a cosmic logos as the Messiah. Not even the Hellenists. So they double down on Judean legal category, all of those power dynamics. Christians, they love the idea of a universal cosmic savior deity. So they get absorbed into everyone else category, set in place by Persia to begin with, and labeled pagan by Rome, or Gentile. So our three categories to sum up and why they matter. In the first century Roman world, we had Judean, protected, quote unquote, ancestral identity, even though it was just stagecraft from Persia, just a few hundred years old when Jesus stepped into the picture. But it was legal. It was recognized. It was tied to the temple and the Persian coded civil law called the Torah. And it had endless sects of theology and cosmology living under this civil law category. It wasn't a monolithic group with one religion. It was many ethnicities, many peoples, many theologies, many cosmologies living under this civil law called the Persian coded Torah. In category 2, you've got your pagans, your Greeks, Romans, and others. This is also legal, recognized, tied to ancestral cults. And these two categories are completely stable in Rome. So this is Judah-centric, post-exile, Babylon-Persia shaped, anti-Ephraim, anti-restoration, pro-interpretive elite, and that's Paul's world. This version is Paul's world. And it's the world Jesus stepped into, but when Jesus stepped into it, He didn't swallow it. He introduced a third category. Rome doesn't have a box for. And then James carried that category forward. That third category is the tent of David, or restored Israel, or the lost sheep coming home. This is James' category, and it's covenantal, not ethnic. It's tribal, not philosophical. It's inheritance-rooted, not cosmic. It's justice-based, not mystical. This third category, this is the one that threatens the temple elites, the Pharisee authority, the Roman stability, the Persian rewrite after the Babylon collapse, the Judah-centric identity theft, post-exile power structure. It threatens everything. Now you know why everybody was involved with the execution of Jesus. Because if the tent of David rises 2,000 years ago or now and reorganizes, and Ephraim's claim resurfaces, the restoration of the kingdom becomes real. I mean, it's real, but if no one knows about it, no one knows about it. Temple authorities bypassed. Rome sees a sovereign movement. Persian identity rewrite collapses. And that's the category that Jesus activated 2,000 years ago. It's a category that James protected 2,000 years ago. It's also the category that Paul dissolved 2,000 years ago, which is why we're here now, still in that same binary. Because the Jesus-James movement collapses, Ephraim's claim disappears, the tent of David became symbolic. The rewrite stayed intact. There's no threat from Rome. The elites remain the recognized managers of Judaism. And it all stayed in place for 2,000 years. Because category 3 was erased. Almost. Almost. Because Ephraim? Well, Ephraim just refuses to die on schedule.
You know, Keith, there's in England kind of an underground top 10 about people that are expected to die soon.
Am I on the list?
Yeah, you're taking the #1 position in that.
Great,
How
okay,
about
I'll
that?
let you know.
But how about this?
It's a bit morbid, and I don't think you should answer
I've
that.
had rumours like that for years, don't
You think it's rubbish?
Huh?
You think
Well,
it's
I
rubbish?
would never get out
Well,
there
you
and
never
say
know when your
it's
number's
rubbish,
up.
You know, I might walk out of here and get run over.
Blue Reed is on the 2nd place. He's very proud of
No, I
it.
think he can beat me, actually.
Energy. 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 You cannot fuck with this. Energy. You cannot fuck with this energy. All those in the session, all of those who are listening, don't miss the message judging me. You cannot fuck with this energy. Energy.